Tanzania 2025, election observers as the last line of defense. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, bringing you the truth they don't want you to hear. From Dar es Salaam to Dakar, from Harare to Freetown, the fight for democracy continues. I'm Zainab Karoma. Tonight, we ask, can election observers save Tanzania's democracy? Or are they just watching history repeat itself? Domestic observers may not improve the quality of polls, but could increase transparency and public awareness. That sentence, in the Tanzanian context, is both a sober diagnosis and a faint hope. As Tanzania heads to the polls on 29 October 2025, the question is whether election observers, regional, continental, and domestic, can indeed serve as a bulwark against outright electoral capture, or whether they will be marginalized, co-opted, or silenced. Setting the stage, the Tanzanian political climate. By now, much of your original description remains sadly accurate. The ruling party, Chama cha Mapinduzi, CCM, has long dominated Tanzania's political landscape, but the 2025 election may prove to be less a contest and more a coronation. In April 2025, the main opposition party, Chadema, was disqualified after declining to sign a code of conduct. That effectively removed its leader, Tundu Lissu, from contention. In August 2025, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, cleared President Samia Suluhu Hassan to run while rejecting key opposition nominations, including Luhaga Mpina, the ACT Wazalendo candidate. In the run-up to the vote, INEC announced boundary changes, nullifying 10 wards and relocating nearly 300 polling stations. This came with the disqualification of 7 councillor candidates, ironically from CCM. Digital repression has increased. The social media platform X, formerly Twitter, has been blocked since May 2025, and Jamii Forums, Tanzania's largest online discussion forum, was suspended for 90 days over misleading content. Activists claim a starker form of repression. 2 East African activists, Boniface Mwangi, Kenya, and Agatha Atuhaire, Uganda, allege abduction and sexual torture while in Tanzania supporting Lissu. They vow to sue the government. All of this suggests that the playing field is tilted, perhaps not just slightly, but severely, well before a single ballot is cast. Still, one must concede a grim but real possibility. The regime might view itself as strong enough to withstand any embarrassments, so the incentive to tolerate observers may remain, at least outwardly. And indeed, in mid-October, the Tanzanian government extended an invitation to SADC and EAC electoral observer missions, reversing earlier indications that they would be barred. The SADC Electoral Observation Mission, SEOM, is now slated to monitor not only polling day, but pre- and post-election processes. That said, the decision to allow observers is more likely tactical than generous, a signal to external actors that we're not hiding everything, rather than a genuine opening. What role can observers truly play? To assert that observers are the last line of defense is dramatic, but in a scenario where institutions are hollowed out, it may not be hyperbole. Their potential value lies less in micromanaging every polling station and more in documenting, deterring, and delegitimizing malpractice. Yet that potential faces steep headwinds, strengths and limitations of observers. What observers can do well: 1. Deterrence effect, somewhat. The presence of observers, especially international and regional ones, may induce local officials to avoid the most blatant violations, lest they be publicly shamed. 2. Documentation and naming and shaming. Observers can record irregularities, capture evidence, and publish reports which empower civil society, media, and international actors. 3. Parallel vote tabulation, PVT. In more constrained contexts, domestic or citizen-based observer groups can carry out PVTs to compare against official tallies, potentially exposing manipulations. 4. Legitimacy signaling. If observers echo credible concerns, they reduce the moral cushion that autocratic governments often rely upon to claim legitimacy. What observers struggle to do or cannot do. Enforce compliance. Observers lack coercive power. If the government refuses to heed recommendations or annuls accountability mechanisms, the observer's statements may be ignored. Access denial or restrictions. Governments can constrain observer mobility, deny accreditation, or limit their ability to monitor critical areas, particularly in rural or conflict-prone zones. Balance diplomacy versus blunt truth-telling. Many observer missions issue hedged statements, some irregularities, rather than strong condemnation, lest they be accused of interference. Indeed, some missions retreat from substance altogether in favor of formulaic language. Opportunity costs and expectations mismatch. Observers may become scapegoats if the election is seen as illegitimate. They should have done more, but by design, their footprint is constrained. Critics have long argued that observer missions are sometimes dealers of legitimacy, i.e., they can confer a veneer of acceptability or withdraw it, depending on diplomatic calculations. In other words, an election might be flawed, but if observers issue a qualified endorsement, that may undercut pushback. Africa-wide comparison, successes and failures. Looking at different African experiences can sharpen our intuition about what might happen in Tanzania. Zimbabwe, 2023. The SADC mission, despite widespread reports of vote rigging and intimidation, was muted in its critique, opting for language about concerns rather than outright condemnation. Mozambique, 2024. Similarly, regional observers were criticized for soft assessments despite serious allegations of irregularities, violence, and exclusion of opposition. Nigeria and Senegal, 2019 other years. The AU has sometimes blurred observer functions with mediation roles, complicating its neutrality. Namibia, 2024. The African Union's observer mission deployed 47 short-term observers and released a preliminary statement judged as relatively straightforward, though in a more open environment. Zambia, 2021. The AU deployed a comprehensive mission, followed by a return visit to present findings and push for implementation with stakeholders. The pattern that emerges is bleak but instructive. Observers tend to follow a cautious path, raise concerns only when they are incontrovertible, accommodate regime sensitivities toward sovereignty, and emphasize recommendations over rebuke. That means observers' power is more moral and reputational than institutional. So, could Tanzania be the exception? Possibly, but only if observers commit courageously and consistently, and if civil society and external actors amplify their voice. The role of domestic observers, local champions or martyrs. Given the institutional capture in Tanzania, domestic observer groups might have the more tangible role. Tanzania already has civil society networks like Tanzania Elections Watch, which monitored the 2020 polls. Domestic observers are closer to the ground, more agile, and less constrained by diplomatic protocols. They can monitor smaller polling units, document harassment, intimidation, or arrests in real time via grassroots networks, educate voters and provide parallel tallies, collaborate with journalists or legal clinics to initiate challenges, but their path is hazardous. They can be threatened, arrested, or banned. They may lack resources, access, or the logistical reach of international missions. Their reports may be dismissed as biased or partisan by the state. Their greatest strength may be to amplify public awareness, making it harder for the regime to dismiss abuses as rumors. In a tightly controlled media environment, that is no small feat. Forward-looking, if not 2025, then what? So far, the prognosis for a free and fair election in Tanzania appears grim. But let's consider what paths lie ahead, and where observation, reform, or resistance might still exert influence. Scenario A, the seamless rubber stamp. In this scenario, CCM claims a landslide, opposition challenges are blocked, and observers issue qualified endorsements. The regime consolidates legitimacy at home and abroad and pushes ahead with further centralization. This is the least disruptive path for the regime. Scenario B, localized disruption, but no regime change. Here, observers and domestic monitors uncover pockets of fraud that are impossible to ignore entirely. In some districts, protests erupt. The regime responds with repression, but external pressure forces small concessions, e.g., selective recounts, arrests of rogue officials. Over time, this erodes CCM's dominance in urban areas, though the national result remains intact. Scenario C, crisis of legitimacy. If observers, domestic and regional, unite in condemning the elections as fundamentally fraudulent, and if civil society, popular protest, and opposition actors mobilize, Tanzania could face a legitimacy crisis. The regime might respond with deeper repression or attempts at a controlled reset, recount, review, or new process under pressure. But this path risks violence and instability. Which scenario prevails will depend on 1. Observer bravery and coherence. Will observers speak truth to power or hedge their language? 2. Civil society mobilization. Can internal pressure force concessions? 3. External leverage. Will donors, regional bodies, or international partners impose consequences, sanctions, diplomatic pressure? 4. Regime risk appetite. How much instability is the regime willing to tolerate? In the more hopeful longer term, the stakes are higher. Institutional reform. Observers' reports must feed into sustained campaigning for reform of electoral law, judiciary independence, media pluralism, and decentralization. Capacity building for domestic monitors. Grassroots groups should be strengthened ahead of future elections, e.g. 2030, so that they are better prepared. Regional and continental accountability, AU, SADC, EAC, may need to evolve from cautious encouragers into bodies that enforce democratic norms more robustly. What if Tanzania's 2025 election defeats expectations and sees vibrant turnout, surprising opposition resilience, and a squeaky threshold? Observers will deserve credit. Conversely, if the election is a predictable coronation, then observers will deserve blame, especially for passivity. Humor in the face of despair. Yes, I promise. If election observers were superheroes, they'd be the watchmen, dark-eyed, serious, wandering the polling stations. But unlike comic scenarios, they lack laser vision, time machines, or enforcement powers. One hopes they brought umbrellas, because if they step in for the polls' reigns of repression, they'll need shelter from both literal and figurative downpours. In some African countries, observers arrive with grand statements. In Tanzania 2025, they may inch in, cameras in hand, hoping no one notices they're holding receipts. Latest developments as of October 2025. As of mid-October, the SADC mission has already set up headquarters in Dar es Salaam and begun consultations with INEC, political parties, civil society, and security agencies. Richard Misawoya, former Speaker of Malawi's National Assembly, heads the SADC team. Pre-election assessment by the Electoral Commission's Forum of SADC Countries, ECF-SADC, in August 2025 engaged both mainland Tanzania and Zanzibar to gauge readiness. But more ominously, observers and opposition activists have expressed concern that rumblings of pre-planned results or adjustment windows are already underway. A not-so-subtle signal that the regime expects to manage dissent after votes fall silent. This is anecdotal but recurring in opposition press. Thus, observers are stepping into a storm. Their choices now will matter, not just for 29th October, but for how Tanzania and the continent conceptualize electoral credibility going forward. After the ballots, the anatomy of observation, and the mirage of reform, so the votes have been cast, the chants have quieted, the ink-stained fingers have dried, and yet democracy in Tanzania remains under question. The preliminary reports are in, the foreign observers have smiled for the cameras, and the ruling party has, surprise, surprise, secured another overwhelming mandate. It feels like déjà vu, doesn't it? The post-election drama, predictable yet painful. The National Electoral Commission proudly announced a peaceful and orderly election, while opposition parties shouted fraud from rooftops that no journalist dared climb. Observers from the African Union, AU, and SADC issued their trademark cautiously diplomatic statement. The elections were conducted in a generally peaceful environment, though certain irregularities were noted. Yes, the classic African observer phrasebook. When you see generally peaceful, it's usually code for. The police shot no one on camera. Ballot boxes arrived, even if they didn't all leave with ballots. We saw one old lady smiling while voting. Therefore, democracy lives. But beneath the polite press releases lies a disturbing truth. Observers have become referees in a game where the whistle is owned by the home team. The African pattern. Rubber stamps and selective outrage. Tanzania's 2025 polls mirror an old African electoral playbook that's been photocopied from Harare to Kampala, Yaoundé to N'Djamena. Let's look around the continent for context. Country year observation outcome translation into plain English Zimbabwe 2023. Elections held peacefully but lacked transparency. The ruling party wrote the results in pencil, and the eraser was very busy. Uganda 2021, limited space for opposition participation. Opposition members participated mostly from behind prison bars. Cameroon 2018, certain logistical challenges observed. Votes took so long to count, some ballots probably expired. Chad 2024, calm atmosphere observed, isolated incidents of irregularities. Calm because the army surrounded the counting centers. Nigeria 2023, technical glitches with electronic transmission noted. Translation, the server caught a convenient cold on election night. Senegal 2024, a competitive and transparent process overall, until the government postponed the next one. Each of these statements reflects the gentle tone of observer diplomacy, a mix of caution, compromise, and occasional comedy. Observers know they walk a tightrope between honesty and access, democracy and diplomacy. But that tightrope has become a hammock where many missions now rest comfortably. Domestic observers, heroes without capes. In Tanzania, domestic observers from Tanzania Elections Watch Legal and Human Rights Center, LHRC, and Change Tanzania deserve medals, not for winning democracy, but for daring to show up. Armed with pens, mobile phones, and courage, they recorded intimidation, ballot stuffing, and unlawful arrests. Some even faced threats for insulting the nation, a charge increasingly popular among African governments allergic to scrutiny. Their real achievement wasn't preventing fraud, but documenting it. And documentation matters because authoritarian regimes thrive in silence, not scandal. When abuses are seen, recorded, and shared, the narrative begins to shift from hopelessness to accountability. The observer paradox? When silence speaks louder than reports. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Observers often know more than they can say. Their internal reports, rich, detailed, and scathing, rarely see daylight. What reaches the public is a diplomatic compromise, vetted by lawyers and diplomats who fear undermining stability. But stability without justice is just stagnation in a tuxedo. When observers hesitate to name and shame, they unwittingly legitimize the very systems they're meant to scrutinize. This is the observer's dilemma. Do you call out tyranny and risk losing future access, or stay polite and watch democracy die slowly in daylight? Africa-wide reform, rethinking observation for the 2030s. If Tanzania 2025 has taught us anything, it's that the continent needs a new generation of observation missions. Ones that are fearless, tech-savvy, and accountable to the people, not just presidents. 1. From observation to verification. Observers must go beyond describing irregularities. They should verify results using parallel tabulation, forensic audits, and digital data comparison. Technology should be their watchdog, not just their notebook. 2. Real-time transparency. Why wait months to release findings? Observer missions should live stream incidents, publish polling data dashboards, and crowdsource reports from voters. If governments block social media, observers should go old school. Radio waves never needed Wi-Fi. 3. Joint regional accountability. The African Union, SADC, and EAC must stop acting like polite cousins at a dysfunctional family reunion. They should form a Continental Electoral Integrity Council with power to sanction rigged regimes, travel bans, funding suspensions, and diplomatic isolation for officials who falsify results. 4. Empowering domestic monitors. Grassroots observers are the backbone of accountability. Let them lead, fund them directly, and protect them legally. Democracy isn't defended by jet-lagged diplomats in five-star hotels. It's defended by citizens who refuse to be silenced. 5. Observer, training in courage and humor. Observers should learn how to handle intimidation with wit. When a ruling party official says, "We had no irregularities," the correct response should be, "Yes, I see. Even your irregularities wear uniforms." A forward-looking reality check. Tanzania's 2025 election will go down in history not for who won, but for how observers and citizens responded. Did they stand tall, speak truth, and expose manipulation? Or did they issue another peaceful and orderly obituary for democracy? The future of African elections may not depend on ballots alone, but on the bravery of those who count, watch, and refuse to be silenced. Because in the end, democracy doesn't die when dictators act. It dies when citizens stop reacting. The Democracy Detox, Rebuilding Africa's Electoral Trust by 2030. If democracy were a patient, Africa's would be in the ICU, breathing through borrowed oxygen from observers, donors, and divine hope. It's not that democracy in Africa is dead, it just keeps fainting during elections. And every time it regains consciousness, the same politicians stand over it, holding ballot boxes and chanting, "We are the will of the people." Welcome to the post-election hangover. Now it's time for detox. Step 1, admit the addiction, Africa's love affair, with rigged stability. Let's be honest, many African governments are addicted to controlled democracy. They love elections, just not the losing part. Tanzania loves calm elections, where calmness is maintained by silence, not consent. Zimbabwe loves observers, especially the kind that wear blindfolds. Uganda loves technology, as long as it's used to shut down the internet. Cameroon loves reforms, the kind written in invisible ink. This addiction to predictable outcomes has created a paradox. Elections happen more often, but accountability happens less. What Africa needs now is a detox, a deep institutional cleanse that replaces ceremonial democracy with functional legitimacy. Step 2, rebuild trust. One voter, one voice, one truth. Trust is the currency of democracy. And right now, it's worth less than a Zimbabwean dollar during hyperinflation. Here's how Africa can rebuild it. 1. Digital transparency, not digital tyranny. Electronic voting isn't the problem. Opaque management is. By 2030, African nations should adopt blockchain-backed electoral systems that allow each vote to be verified publicly without revealing identity. If banks can track billions of transactions safely, surely Africa can count ballots without missing trucks. 2. Election commissions must be independent in reality, not just in acronyms across Africa. Commissions with fancy names like INEC, ZEC, ECZ, and NEC all claim independence. Yet most act like presidential departments for victory management. By 2030, reform should make commissioners appointed through multi-party parliamentary votes, not by the very incumbents they're meant to oversee. 3. Voter Education 2.0. Democracy in the language of the people. Democracy must speak Swahili, Hausa, Yoruba, Creole, Amharic, and Shona, not just English and French. From radio dramas to TikTok explainers, civic education should meet the people where they are, not where the donors want them to be. 4. Real consequences for rigging an election should be treated as an economic crime because it robs a nation's future just like corruption does. The African Union should establish a continental electoral crimes tribunal where evidence from observers, journalists, and citizens can lead to sanctions or prosecution. Step 3. Empower the observers of tomorrow. Today's observers wear badges. Tomorrow's will carry smartphones. If 2025 showed anything, it's that the next wave of democracy defenders won't be career diplomats. They'll be young Africans live streaming injustice in real time. Imagine this by 2030. Crowdsourced observation platforms. Citizens upload photos, videos, and results directly from polling stations to blockchain-secured portals. AI-assisted anomaly detection. Algorithms identify inconsistencies in voter turnout or results, flagging possible manipulation instantly. Observer training boot camps, run by regional networks to train thousands of youth activists in ethics, technology, and security. Because when citizens become observers, truth becomes harder to bury. Step 4. Redefine the African Union's role, from complement factory to compliance enforcer. The African Union, AU, has all the right charters and all the wrong courage. Its African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, ACDEG, is beautifully written. It just needs to be used. By 2030, the AU should evolve from a club of presidents to a community of accountability. 1. Name and shame, publish lists of countries that violate ACDEG commitments annually. 2. Withhold legitimacy. Bar coup-installed or fraudulently elected leaders from AU summits. 3. Empower the Pan-African Parliament. Give it oversight power over election missions and reports. 4. Citizen complaint mechanism. Allow civil society to file petitions directly to the AU Peace and Security Council over electoral malpractice. As one Tanzanian activist quipped, the AU loves peace even if it means making peace with injustice. By 2030, that must change. Step 5. Reimagine democracy. African solutions, African flavors. Democracy doesn't have to be a Western import with an African accent. It can and must be homegrown, hybrid, and humane. Ubuntu democracy governance rooted in Ubuntu. I am because we are. It emphasizes collective good, not individual greed, dialogue, not division, smart villages, smart governance. Link community councils directly to national decision-making via digital platforms. If a village can track its water usage or crop yield through mobile data, it can certainly track its local councilors' promises. Cultural legitimacy. Revive the idea of palaver trees, traditional spaces for open public dialogue. In 2030, that tree might be virtual, a WhatsApp group, or a community app, but the spirit is the same. Every voice counts. Step 6. Infuse humor into civic resistance. Humor disarms fear. In repressive states, laughter can be revolutionary. When citizens mock dictators online, they reclaim power. When memes expose corruption faster than commissions, that's participatory democracy at work. As one Kenyan comedian recently said during anti-tax protests, if you can't overthrow your president, at least overlaugh him. That's not just humor, it's survival. And in Africa's next democratic chapter, satire might become the loudest form of truth-telling. The African future we deserve. Imagine an Africa where citizens trust elections because they designed them. Observers speak without fear because they answer to truth, not protocol. Presidents win because they earned it, not because they edited the voter roll. Journalists investigate, not disappear. Youth don't flee their nations, they run for office. This is not utopia. It's possible if Africa stops outsourcing its democracy to donors and starts insourcing accountability. Because democracy, like fitness, can't be achieved by hiring a coach. You have to sweat for it yourself. Epilogue. From observers to guardians, Tanzania's 2025 elections may be the latest cautionary tale in Africa's democratic story, but they don't have to be the last. The next generation of Africans, armed with smartphones, satire, and stubborn hope, will be the guardians of the ballot, not just observers of its burial. And perhaps by 2030, the continent will finally prove that democracy, when truly Africanized, doesn't just survive, it thrives. Africa's next wave, from street protests to policy power. In the beginning was the protest, and the protest became a hashtag, and the hashtag became a movement. If the 1960s were the age of liberation, then the 2020s to 2030s are the age of reclamation. Across Africa, a new generation isn't just demanding democracy, they're redesigning it. Armed with smartphones, satire, and stubborn hope, they are transforming streets into parliaments, hashtags into legislation, and frustration into civic innovation. The rise of Africa's digital dissidents. Africa's youth, 70% of the continent's population, have realized something powerful. If they can't get airtime on state TV, they'll create their own channels online. From Lagos to Lusaka, from Nairobi to Niamey, digital activism has become the new resistance. EndSARS, Nigeria. What began as a youth-led protest against police brutality in 2020 evolved into a broader demand for accountability, governance, and mental liberation. Even after the government's crackdown, the movement's energy inspired new forms of youth political organizing. Congo is bleeding, DRC. Young Congolese use social media to draw global attention to the human cost of cobalt mining, transforming hashtags into humanitarian awareness campaigns. The fees must fall, South Africa. Students taught a continent that education is not a privilege. It's a promise. Ruto must go, Kenya 2025. Mourners turned into protesters, grief turned into political awakening, and hashtags turned into a national referendum on leadership. Hashtag Free Jacob Zuma to hashtag Accountability Now, South Africa. A lesson in how online mobilization can shape, distort, or discipline political narratives. The message is clear. Africa's youth no longer wait to be included. They log in, organize, and demand inclusion. From hashtags to headline reforms, the digital generation is redefining activism itself. No longer just oppositional, they're operational. In Kenya, the 2025 youth-led Fiscal Justice Coalition successfully lobbied for parliamentary hearings on government spending transparency. In Ghana, the hashtag Fix the Country campaign birthed a youth-led civic monitoring tool that tracks local government budgets in real time. In Senegal, after years of online mobilization, activists formed a new political party that secured 5 parliamentary seats in 2024. Proof that tweets can become treaties. In Sierra Leone, digital journalists from the African Voice Network and the Bold African Voice used YouTube platforms to expose corruption and spark legislative debate, showing that citizen media can shape national narratives. In short, youths are moving from protest to policy. They're no longer content with slogans. They want signatures on reform bills. The digital battlefield, freedom versus firewalls. Of course, governments have noticed, and like all outdated regimes facing modern tools, they've responded the old-fashioned way by pulling the plug. Internet blackouts, fake news laws, and cybercrime bills have become the new handcuffs of authoritarian control. Ethiopia, Sudan, and Tanzania have all enforced nationwide internet shutdowns during elections or protests. Uganda taxes social media usage, effectively charging citizens for their own free speech. Zimbabwe's Cyber and Data Protection Act makes false information a crime, conveniently defined by the same people who falsify elections. Yet, every time they shut down one platform, African youths migrate to another. From X to Telegram, from Facebook to TikTok, they're always one VPN ahead of the regime. As one witty activist put it, you can block the internet, but you can't block intelligence. The power shift. Youth as policy architects across Africa, young professionals, coders, lawyers, climate activists, entrepreneurs are entering policymaking spaces not as rebels, but as reformers. In Nigeria, tech innovators are collaborating with the Electoral Commission to improve voter registration via biometric systems. In Rwanda, young women lead digital inclusion programs that have expanded internet access to rural villages. In Egypt, post-2011 movements gave birth to social enterprises that now advise on transparency laws. In Botswana, youth councils directly contribute to national budget debates. This is not chaos, it's evolution. Africa's youth are no longer asking, will the leaders listen? They're saying, move aside, we're coding the Constitution. Humor as resistance, laughing in the face of power. African youth have discovered that laughter is mightier than censorship. Memes, skits, and animated parodies have become political weapons sharper than bayonets. Why? Because satire bypasses fear. And dictators can't jail a punchline. Kenyan TikTokers now explain tax policy through comedy skits that rack up millions of views. Ghanaian YouTubers use animated parables to dissect corruption. Sierra Leonean podcasters turn political gossip into civic education. When young Africans laugh at power, power begins to lose its magic. The future, from disruption to construction. By 2030, Africa's democratic landscape will look very different if youth movements sustain their current momentum. Scenario 1, the youth governance boom. Youth-led parties gain traction across countries, merging activism with governance. New leaders emerge from protest trenches, not party hierarchies. Scenario 2, digital democracy 2.0, online citizen platforms track budgets, monitor elections, and crowdsource lawmaking. Blockchain, AI, and mobile voting become mainstream civic tools. Scenario 3, the Pan-African Reform Alliance. A continental youth coalition forms, transcending borders to pressure the AU and regional blocs for genuine reforms on democracy, climate, and governance. Scenario 4, the regime retaliation loop. Some governments will fight back harder, more censorship, more arrests, more propaganda. But every crackdown only seeds new creativity. The youth will adapt, as they always have, the African Renaissance 2.0. What the first generation of Pan-Africanists did with speeches, today's youth are doing with smartphones. They are creating an Africa that doesn't just resist oppression, it reprograms it. It's no longer about asking, who will liberate us? It's about declaring, we are the liberation. Final word for now. The observers may watch, the politicians may scheme, but the youth, they are the engineers of the new Africa, designing systems where votes count, leaders serve, and truth trends faster than tyranny. And as this new generation rises, coding democracy, remixing governance, and hashtagging history, one thing becomes clear. Africa's future won't just be decided at the ballot box. It will be designed on a laptop. The digital continent, how AI, media, and technology will shape Africa's next democratic frontier. Artificial intelligence won't save Africa's democracy, but it might expose who's pretending to run it. As Africa stands on the edge of a new digital dawn, the struggle for democracy is entering its most unpredictable phase yet. The battle is no longer just between ballots and bullets. It's between data and disinformation, algorithms and autocrats, truth and trending lies. The AI awakening, hope or hype? Artificial intelligence is transforming how Africans vote, campaign, and hold leaders accountable. In the right hands, AI can strengthen democracy. In the wrong ones, it can destroy it faster than a midnight coup. The promise. AI-driven fact-checking bots can detect election misinformation in real time. Machine learning can analyze polling data for anomalies, helping observers identify vote rigging early. AI tools can assist in translating campaign materials into indigenous languages, bridging the linguistic gap in civic education. Predictive models can detect patterns of political violence or hate speech before they explode. The peril. Deepfakes and AI-generated propaganda can turn lies into viral realities. Governments can deploy AI surveillance systems to track activists and suppress dissent. Digital colonialism looms. foreign tech companies harvesting African data with little oversight. If Africa's leaders and citizens don't set ethical boundaries now, the continent could trade one form of manipulation for another, analog dictatorship replaced by digital deception. Citizen media, the new fourth power traditional media in many African countries, has been muzzled, censored, or co-opted. But digital media, independent YouTube channels, podcasts, and social pages have become the new parliament of the people. Platforms like the Bold African Voice, BAV, the African Voice Network, TIAV, and Voice of Salaam, VOS, now do what many state broadcasters won't. They expose truth, dissect power, and invite dialogue that resonates from Freetown to Dar es Salaam. Citizen journalism has turned mobile phones into weapons of accountability. One video clip can ignite a movement, one live stream can topple a cover-up, and one bold voice can echo louder than 100 propaganda stations. Toward 2035, Africa's digital democracy scenario. By 2035, Africa's democratic map could look dramatically different depending on how its leaders embrace or resist technological change. Scenario A, the digital democracy boom, AI and blockchain secure elections. Citizens vote via verified apps. Corruption becomes traceable. Governments gain legitimacy through transparency. Scenario B, the algorithmic autocracy. Ruling elites harness AI for mass surveillance and censorship, automating repression with digital precision. Elections remain predictable, people remain silent. Scenario C, the hybrid path. Some nations democratize, others regress, creating a continental split between digital freedom zones like Ghana, Kenya, Namibia, and firewalled republics like Uganda, Cameroon, and Eritrea. The difference will depend on leadership choices today. Final reflections, the mirror and the message. Africa has reached a defining crossroad. The old excuses, colonialism, poverty, or we are still learning democracy, have expired. Now the question is simple. Will Africa's leaders choose power or posterity? Advice to African leaders. 1. Lead, don't rule. Power is not ownership, it's stewardship. The people are not your subjects, they are your shareholders. 2. Respect, term limits before they respect you. Every time you extend your mandate, you shorten your legacy. Leave when the applause is still real. 3. Empower the youth, don't fear them. The youth are not a threat to stability, they are its future. If you don't give them seats at the table, they will build their own. 4. Protect the press, even when it criticizes you. A nation without truth tellers becomes a kingdom of lies. Censorship doesn't silence critics, it amplifies suspicion. 5. Invest in technology and transparency. Let digital tools track budgets, expose corruption, and streamline elections. The more open your systems, the more credible your leadership. 6. Practice Ubuntu in governance. Remember, I am because we are. Leadership without empathy is tyranny in a necktie. Key messages summarized. Democracy in Africa is not dying, it's evolving. From dusty ballot boxes to digital platforms, from submission to civic participation. Observers alone can't defend democracy. Citizens, journalists, and youth must become the new guardians of integrity. Technology is a double-edged sword. It can empower or enslave. Its moral direction depends on leadership vision. Africa's future belongs to its youth, digitally fluent, globally aware, and determined to reclaim politics from the past. True leadership means building systems that outlive personalities, strong institutions, not strong men. And humor remains our greatest weapon, because when people laugh at tyranny, they are halfway to defeating it. Epilogue. The bold African voice. The African story is changing, not through foreign interventions or observer reports, but through the courage of ordinary people who refuse to stay silent. From the streets of Nairobi to the villages of Freetown, from the podcasts of Accra to the tweets of Dar es Salaam, a new chorus is rising. We are not just the future, we are the now. And as that chorus grows louder, may African leaders remember, history does not forgive arrogance, but it always rewards courage. So, to Africa's rulers, reformers, and rebels alike, the time to choose your legacy is now. Either stand with the people or stand in their way, because this new generation is not waiting for permission. They are writing Africa's next chapter in real time. One post, one protest, one policy at a time. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV, where Africa speaks and the world listens. Africa doesn't just need observers, it needs participants. If you believe in the power of truth, transparency, and the people's voice, join the conversation. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to The Bold African Voice, BAV.